Introduction. We are being recorded this morning, and my name is Eli Evankovich. I'm the co-chair of the House Bipartisan Manufacturing Caucus. Before we get started, I'd just like to go down the line and have each member introduce themselves, tell them perhaps a little bit about what some manufacturing in their district, maybe some support steel operations or steel mills in their district, and we'll start with my pitch-hitting co-chair, Representative Paul Costa from Allegheny.
Good morning, everybody. I am Representative Paul Costa. My district is in Allegheny County. The center of my district is actually Braddock, PA, which is home of Edgar Thompson plant and a lot of other manufacturing that is in my area. And I'm honored to be here, and hopefully we can help you guys out.
Stephen Bloom, representative from the 199th District, which is in Cumberland County, Pennsylvania.
Chris Dush, District 66, Jefferson, Indiana County. We have rail manufacturing and the coal that used to supply our steel industry down in the Pittsburgh region.
Good morning, Jim Marshall, 14th District, parts of Beaver and Butler counties. Still home to a lot of small and large steel manufacturing and other manufacturing.
Representative Dan Frankel, City of Pittsburgh. No, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike Reese. I represent the 59th Legislative District, which is the eastern portion of Westmoreland County and the northwestern portion of Somerset County. Several small and large manufacturers in the district.
Good morning, Mark Mustio, Allegheny County, 44th Legislative District, Pittsburgh Airport area to be specific. Lots of distribution companies coming in there, and several in the steel distribution business.
Representative Benninghoff. Representative Bill Courts is also here. Bill actually represents the Irvin plant and probably most of the employees that work at the Clairton, U.S. Steel Clairton Coke plant. So the Manufacturing Caucus, this is a little bit of a unique setup for us. We typically don't do events in the Capitol. We have, since this caucus started in 2013, we've been very active. I believe we've toured over 65 small and large manufacturers across the state of Pennsylvania, from western Pennsylvania to the Philadelphia region and the Northeast. We try to focus on trying to understand how manufacturing works, what it looks like, but most importantly, what the challenges are of small and large manufacturers in Pennsylvania, things that we can address, bipartisan things that we can address. And we find that there are, everyone has their own issues that fall into a partisan category, but a lot of the concerns of manufacturers in Pennsylvania relate to things that can be, I believe, resolved in a bipartisan fashion. In today's discussions, we'll focus on the state of manufacturing, in particular the steel industry and support industries, and the effect that, in particular, some of the global impacts have, and how the state of Pennsylvania can perhaps be a leader in addressing some of those problems at the federal level and here locally. So, before we get going, I just want to announce that members will be coming and going. So don't be dismayed or alarmed by that. We were actually just joined by Representative Ted Harhai, who's welcome to join us up here. It's a very bipartisan group of lawmakers up here. Ted, why don't you help us out with that? So with that, we'll get started with first up, if Chris Massantonio, General Manager, Government Affairs at U.S. Steel.
Bob's going to join.
And Bob McAuliffe, the Director, District 10 for the United Steelworkers. When you're ready, gentlemen, and whomever wants to go first.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Evankovich and members of the House Manufacturing Caucus. We appreciate the opportunity to be here before you today. My name is Chris Massantonio. I'm General Manager, United States Steel Corporation, General Manager of Government Affairs for the United States. I've been with U.S. Steel for about 21 years now, and it's a great company to work for.
Yeah, my name is Bob McAuliffe. I'm the District 10 Director for United Steelworkers, representing our members and retirees throughout the Commonwealth.
Bob and I serve as the co-chairs of the Pennsylvania Steel Alliance, which is a partnership of Pennsylvania steel companies and labor unions working together to educate Pennsylvanians and the elected officials in Pennsylvania about the positive impacts of the steel industry and the policy issues affecting the industry in the Commonwealth. The steel industry today in Pennsylvania continues to play a very important role in our economy. It is, particularly in southwestern Pennsylvania, according to the American Iron and Steel Institute, the industry supports 136,000 jobs statewide. And according to a 2013 study by the Pennsylvania Economy League of Southwestern Pennsylvania, in southwestern Pennsylvania alone, the steel industry is responsible for roughly 22,000 total jobs.
Chris, if I can just, real quick, can you pull the microphone just a little bit closer to your face? And for the benefit of the testifiers, we have your written testimony. If you want to summarize in the interest of time and give us a little bit extra time to ask questions, that might be
Sure.
best.
Sure. Happy to do that. You can see in the testimony, average wage for steel industry jobs here in Pennsylvania is $70,000. $70,000 per year. That was in 2010, so it might even be higher today. It's $25,000 higher than the average wage for the private sector as a whole. So as you can see, these are very good paying jobs here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the kind of jobs we need to secure. Pennsylvania, and again, I just want to get these stats in front of the committee. I think they're important. Pennsylvania is also a national leader among steel states. This 2013 Pennsylvania Economy League study found that Pennsylvania leads the nation in steel industry capital expenditures for that year by a wide margin. There was over $771 million invested in Pennsylvania by the steel industry that year. It also ranks among the top 5 nationally for gross domestic product generated by the primary metals manufacturing industry. And I think we actually rank number 3 behind Ohio and Indiana. So as you can see, the steel industry is important here in Pennsylvania even today. At this point, I'll let Bob make his remarks.
Thank you, Chris. United Steelworkers is North America's largest industrial union and the most skilled steelworking workforce in the world. But our members are threatened by unfair and often illegal trade practices. The challenges that the steel industry faces in regards to the enforcement of our nation's trade laws are critical for the continued growth of our economy and for the livelihoods of so many hardworking men and women in the steel industry. We made the steel that made this country one of the most powerful nations in the world. And we made the steel that was essential to defending our nation during times of war. When it comes to national security, there's no doubt that Americans will be less safe without a strong domestic steel industry. You don't have to take my word for that. You can just read the Alliance for American Manufacturing new report, Steel Import Surge, which threatens U.S. national security. This study examines how China, Russia, and other potentially hostile trading partners are flooding the domestic market with heavily subsidized, underpricing steel products. The study concludes that the United States must act quickly and take decisive actions to preserve its domestic steel industry. Unfairly traded steel imports and illegal steel dumping have reached historic proportions. China continues to lead the surge of steel imports by flooding our markets with overcapacity of steel products. The study encourages our government leaders to use all available legal and legislative tools to safeguard American-made steel, to ensure that the industry will remain strong and ready foundation for our national security. These challenges that the steel industry faces in regards to the enforcement of our country's steel industry and your consideration of the men and women that are not just members of the United Steelworkers, but are also your friends, your neighbors, and small business owners all across Pennsylvania.
Yeah, as Bob said, despite the continued strong presence of the steel industry here in Pennsylvania, we're in the midst of very challenging times because of the level of illegal foreign steel imports. In 2014, finished steel imports increased by a dramatic 36%, which was an all-time record. Unfairly traded steel imports have reached historic levels in 2015 and 2016, taking almost 30% of the domestic market. The impact on American industry and workers has been devastating. The primary cause of the surge of imports is global steel overcapacity. China's steel industry currently represents half of all global steel production. 9 of China's top 10 producers are state-owned enterprises. They continue to overproduce steel, and their exports are flooding every market around the world. Much of the world's steel ends up in the United States because we have the most open markets in the world. Global steel overcapacity and circumvention of our trade laws is devastating to the domestic industry. Steel mills have been closed and idled even here in Pennsylvania, but across the United States as well. These closures have had profoundly negative effect on the families impacted by the losses, as Bob said. Local communities have suffered, and again, as Bob has mentioned, our country becomes more reliant on foreign steel imports, and our homeland security is put in jeopardy. At the highest levels of our company, U.S. Steel and the United Steelworkers, we work together on this issue. The leaders of our 2 organizations have spoken to Congress and the administration on several occasions about the need to enforce our trade laws. In late April, our company, U.S. Steel, filed a complaint with the U.S. International Trade Commission to initiate an investigation under Section 337 of the Tariff Act of 1930. This is against the largest Chinese steel producers and their distributors. The complaint alleges the illegal conspiracy to fix prices, the theft of trade secrets, and the circumvention of trade duties by false labeling. This was a bold step by our company, and it's supported by the USW, to take on these unfair trade practices and illegal dumping. And we believe that the administration in Washington, D.C. should determine that the private right of action warrants full consideration in a robust investigation by the U.S. International Trade Commission. This issue and many of the issues we'll talk about today are global trade issues. In large part, addressing this issue must be done at the federal level, but we need your support, and that's why we're here today. We would encourage and ask for your help as elected representatives of the government in Pennsylvania to continue to support the steel industry. Earlier this week, the House of Representatives overwhelmingly approved House Resolution 811. We'd like to thank you and Representative Evankovich, you in particular, for sponsoring the legislation, which was co-sponsored by Representative Burns. This resolution urges federal elected officials to fight for strong enforcement of our nation's trade laws in order to level the playing field for the domestic steel industry. In addition to supporting House Resolution 811, we would ask this caucus and its members to call upon the International Trade Commission to support U.S. Steel's Section 337 complaint. My office would be glad to provide any assistance and information you will need to help you in that regard. I believe Bob would agree with me that the hardworking men and women in Pennsylvania's steel industry and steel workers across the country deserve a fair and transparent hearing on the facts of the 337 complaint filed by U.S. Steel. The illegal and unfair methods of competition and other offending acts in the importation and sale of steel products in the United States can no longer be tolerated. In closing, I would ask you to join us in our efforts to ensure that U.S. Steel is able to present its case. These deeply troubling allegations demand a full and fair hearing. Moreover, the American people deserve to witness our legal process presented in this important legal action. Thank you again for having us here today. We're happy to answer any questions.
Chris, Bob, thank you so much for your testimony. We do have members that need to be coming and going, but we do have several questions and comments. Representative Mustia, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Massantonio, you mentioned Section 337 of the Tariff Act of 1930 in the filing you've made under that. Would one of the remedies be enacting tariffs on the steel that's being basically dumped on this country?
Representative Mustio, no, it's not a tariff. It seeks the exclusion of all unfairly traded steel products into the U.S. market from China.
So it would remove them from the market altogether unless they change the way they're...
Yeah. Importantly, where we are in the process, the initial decision must be made probably the end of this month to accept the complaint and have a full and fair hearing of the evidence we present.
How long does that process take?
That decision will probably be made the end of this month.
And then when they make the decision, is there an investigation after that?
The investigation could take anywhere from 6 to 10 months.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Muscio. Chris, as an aside to that, if the ITC does not rule in favor of the complaint, are steel tariffs an additional remedy to some of the problems with steel dumping, with steel imports altogether?
I just want to add something. With the tariffs, in spite of that, and we could win a trade case. You know, U.S. Steel, United Steelworkers testify in Washington, D.C., but the dumping continues. They'll pay the tariff, but still the damage is being done. And we have plants closed here in Pennsylvania and also across the country. In spite of the tariffs, they still continue to dump because it's just paying that penalty, and we still have plant closures. With the trade case, the damage is already done. We lose workers.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I mean, our CEOs often quoted the saying, we're going to use every tool available under the law to stop this problem.
Representative Quartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. The Section 337 that was filed, Chris, you mentioned that the investigation may take 10 months. What do you anticipate after that? After the investigation, are there a series of other hearings, appeals? What kind of timeline are we looking at for this thing to play out?
Yeah, Representative Quartz, I'll probably have to get back to you on that. You know, my general understanding of the process is a decision will be made shortly, perhaps the end of this month, as to whether or not the complaint will move forward. Then the investigation phase, 6, 8, 10 months. Let me get back to you, though, with some more information on what would happen at the end of that investigation. I think a decision is rendered, but let me find out officially how that happens.
Okay, if I may follow up, Mr. Chairman, have any other steel companies joined in, ArcelorMittal or anyone else? Are you anticipating them to join in on this?
I don't want to speak for them, obviously. Right now, this is a private action by U.S. Steel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Quartz. Representative Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank both of you gentlemen for coming in and offering this testimony. It's an interesting topic and one of, I think, great concern. Steel dumping. Explain that to me. So how does that steel get into our country? Who buys it? What products is it being used for? Can you just kind of lay that out for me?
Yeah. Representative Reese, thanks for the question. It's kind of a broad question and probably one difficult for us to answer. You know, as I said, there's overcapacity of steel in the world right now, and a lot of that steel finds its way here to the U.S. It's really a private matter who purchases that steel or who decides to buy it domestically from U.S. Steel producers. Let me just give you some stats that I have here in front of me. It'll give you a really good idea of the severity of this problem. According to the American Iron and Steel Institute, they estimate that China accounts for up to 425 million metric tons of the worldwide capacity for steel production. Just to put that in perspective, the United States produces less than 100 million tons annually. Okay, China 425 capacity, U.S. 100. Chinese crude steel production soared from 128 million metric tons in 2000 to 823 million metric tons in 2014. This is an increase of almost 700 million tons. Last statistic, excess production dumped in the world markets. China's steel exports have surged to 112 million metric tons, a 20% increase just in 2015. So you can see what's happening. This production is growing in China. It's not growing for domestic consumption. It's growing for export. And a lot of it's finding its way here in the United States.
Thank you for that. So I know that we've taken some steps to, at least on the government side, to make sure that steel is being made here in America and used on our government projects. So I'm assuming, based on what you said, with that excess steel coming into the marketplace here, that obviously, you know, private manufacturers are buying that product and then turning it into products that they're selling to consumers in the United States. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, but I want to talk about energy and energy costs and the cost of manufacturing and how that impacts your business and manufacturers in the country. Mm-hmm. So obviously China and India, they're able to use energy in a different way than we are. And quite honestly, they have more affordable energy available to them because of less regulations. Does that play into this concern here? Are they able to produce steel in a much more cost-efficient manner because of energy costs?
I think without the, sorry, Chris, I think without the regulations like we have in this country, they're going to continue to pollute, and there's no regulation that prevents them. So therefore, including their workforce, they have millions of folks that are producing the steel and so forth, and without those regulations, they just don't care, is most basic way I can put that. And they're going to continue to bring that product into this country. You know, I don't know who's buying it, to tell you the truth, but I do know about the overcapacity of it, and I know a lot of them are state subsidized, or, you know, by the government, which we don't have. So it makes a big difference there.
Now, if I could just add to Bob's answer, Representative, I think, you know, the heart of your question is whether or not, you know, the American steel industry can compete. It's our position, and I think Bob would share, we have the most efficient steel mills in the world running in the U.S. One of them is in Representative Costa's district. The U.S. Steel Mon Valley Works, one of the most efficient steel mills in the world. It recycles energy. We have a coke plant where we generate coke oven gas. We recycle it to heat our furnaces and to generate electricity. It's certified as an alternative energy producer because of the recycling of the coke oven gas. And on that point, you talk about regulations, there's really no comparison between the United States and some of the foreign competition. The United States has the most stringent regulatory structure in the world, most likely, for these industrial operations, certainly from an environmental standpoint. For those that are concerned about climate change and improving our environment around the world, they should support the American steel industry because we are the most efficient, environmentally responsible industry in the world.
Thank you both.
Yep.
Thank you, Representative Reese. It's funny that Chris mentions the recycling operations of the Mon Valley Works. There was a sign, a poster, walking into the lunchroom, I'm sure Bill Quartz remembers, that says U.S. Steel, American steel manufacturing, the biggest recycling operation in the world, and it just couldn't be more. It couldn't be further from the truth. It couldn't be more clear that that's the case. But Representative Costa.
Thank you, Chairman. Hey, Chris, I know we passed a resolution, and I know Representative Quartz, Representative Gergely, and I sent a letter of support for the trade. What else as House members can we do to help the situation?
I think there's a lot. Foremost, I think just generally speaking, Washington, D.C. needs to hear your voice because you are the elected representatives of Pennsylvania, and you're here today because you care about manufacturing and steel. We work closely, the union and the company, but when you have your elected officials in a nonpartisan way supporting these concerns that we have raised, we need you to continue to do that, Representative. The resolution is one way you can do it. Supporting the 337 is another way. Talking to the congressional delegation, talking to your contacts, perhaps in the Obama administration, Department of Commerce. Those types of efforts are all important. So we can talk more about that, in particular, what you might be able to do to help us. But we need your support. Washington needs to hear your voice.
I just want to add something to that. You know, we've already lost probably with these existing trade agreements and one that we're right now opposing with the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. We've already lost 60,000 jobs in this state, steelworking jobs. When you lose one steelworker...
Sorry, did you say in our state?
Yeah, no, I said in the state.
States. Okay.
Yeah. And if there's steel-related jobs. If you lose one steelworker job, that equals 7 additional jobs within that community. And right now, in Pennsylvania, there's probably maybe 5 mills that we have. In the Mon Valley, we have the Clarington Works, Urban Works, and the Edgar Thompson facility. Then you have the steel over in Steel. We have a facility there, then over in Coatesville, and that's pretty much it in the state. And I don't think they're building any more steel mills in this country. I think over China, they're probably building one. You know, they have more steel mills, more smelting plants. You know, for aluminum industry, and that trend continues over in China. We just don't. We're not doing that. I think we have the most, like Chris said, we have the most skilled workforce, the best quality steel. There's no doubt about that. Our members are very proud of the product they make. I think it's devastating what's happening to the middle class because these trade agreements. I think we need help from the state to encourage our federal legislators to make sure that we don't continue to have these unfair trade agreements. You know, the steel workers in U.S. Steel, I'm sure, is not opposed to trade. It's that level playing field that we need, and we just can't afford to lose any more any more plants within Pennsylvania.
You already answered my second question, but I was going to ask, I realize that they are bringing the steel here and charging a lot cheaper than what we can, but the quality, is it anywhere close to the quality that we make in Edgar Thomson or Clairton or wherever?
I don't have this, I couldn't prove that by no means, but, just talking to other folks and knowing about, say, for the pipe industry, which had the pipe plant in McKeesport that closed up, McKeesport too, but it's my understanding the quality of steel pipe that's being produced in China, they don't have the same regulations and the same requirements like we do here in this country.
I mean, it reminds me, do you ever see the movie Moonstruck?
Yeah.
When the guy's trying to sell the plumbing and he talks about the 3 different kinds of, so, I mean, how do we convince our manufacturers, whoever's purchasing this steel, that in the long run, you're better off, even though you have to pay more, you're better off purchasing the U.S. steel that is made as opposed to foreign, because less repairs, more reliability, and in the end of the day, you're going to save money. How do we get that message out?
I mean, there's a number of ways, and obviously that's a private relationship between a producer and a customer, but we have excellent customers. They understand the quality that they're receiving from our company is outstanding, world-class. A lot of potential purchasers probably look at price representative, and when steel's coming in from halfway around the world at 30 or 40% below the price of production, for some of them, especially in difficult economic times, it's probably tough to walk away from that. So that might be part of the problem. But again, I mean, we have great customers. We produce a world-class product, and we will compete with anyone in the world as long as everyone plays by the same rules.
Thank you, Representative Costa. Just very brief, Representative Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've talked about what role the government can play. Can you express what role the general public might play, or the consumer? You talked about the manufacturers as a consumer, but is there a role for the general public? Is there, can just the concept of Buy American help?
Representative Marshall, I believe that within a community, when we start losing those jobs, when you start losing those jobs in these mills because of the overcapacity and the dumping in this country, and I can use like the Edgar Thomson facility, for example. When we start losing those particular jobs, that has an impact, an economic impact on the community, not just for the tax base, but how is somebody in that community going to buy a house? How are they going to afford to buy an automobile? Unless they're working at a Walmart or 7-Eleven or someplace like that. These are good paying jobs where folks don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs to make a living. But I think it has an economic impact in that community. I think the general public has to understand without those jobs, it will have an impact. You go up toward Leedsdale and some of those other areas where you see where some of those plants had closed down, and some of the different areas around Homestead and so forth where I call them plywood cities, where you see plywood on the windows and the homes, it has an impact on the real estate. And nobody wants to move into those communities where you have these closed down plants. So I think it is important to the communities.
Yeah, if I could just add to that briefly, in regards to the 337 action, we've already seen overwhelming support from across the country, bipartisan support among elected officials, governors, Democrat and Republican from steel-producing states, iron mining states up in Minnesota, a number of chambers such as House, Senate leadership, again, nonpartisan, letters of support from customers, unions, certainly the steel workers, Teamsters, building trades. So we've seen overwhelming support for this action. Again, keep in mind, what we're asking is for a full and fair, transparent hearing. We want the evidence to be made public and reviewed. That's all we're asking for at this point. Nobody's opposed to that. The American people deserve it. Certainly the people that work in the steel industry deserve it.
Did you have a follow-up, Representative Marshall?
Well, I would say that certainly involving the public in this could be helpful. I'm sure the members of the steel workers are reaching out to their representatives and government. I'm sure that the other employees, non-represented employees of the companies are reaching out. But I think that you really need to involve as many people as you can to get this important issue resolved. And I think it's clear you have our support. We hope we can gather more support for this, and get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative
I just want to add one thing, Representative Marshall. We've had, including up in Beaver County, we had at least 13 town hall meetings. So that was another way. I should have mentioned that before, that we are, letting the public know about that. So, thank you.
Just a real brief editorial, and then there's two other members that want to make comments or ask questions. I think we're sitting up here, gentlemen, and we're hungry. We want to be able to help you. We want to be able to do what we can to make sure that these steel jobs, this steel production, not just stays in Pennsylvania, but stays in the United States of America. And there's just some realities that we can only control certain things. We can certainly be as close of partners as we can for the employers in Pennsylvania and the employees in Pennsylvania with our federal partners and ensuring that trying to make sure that they do what they need to do. But I think the genesis of some of the questions that you hear is to try to get at a solution for maybe something a little more substantive that we can do here in the state of Pennsylvania. I think that Representative Reese's question of how does the steel get here, I think is a very critical question, and I'm not sure that we really delved into that as much as we possibly could, because I think it relates to a number of the questions that have been asked sitting here. Now, my understanding of this is that U.S. Steel has customers like General Electric and Ford Motor Company and GE and General Motors, and they order steel from U.S. Steel. It's specifically made on order and it's sent to them. But then there's this whole other secondary market of customers, not maybe tier one quality customers, but, folks that make lawnmowers, folks that make farm tractors, sheeting steel that's used in building construction, et cetera. And I think the origin of the question that Representative Reese asked is, for those products that are made with not specific order steel made in the United States, how does it get here? And how does it get into our products? And I think the core of that perhaps is, is there a way for the end manufacturer, the distributor, the broker of that steel, is there a way for us to maybe make them identify the country of origin? Because perhaps they really just don't know. They're getting a roll of steel. They're getting a sheet of steel. It's not stamped with a birthmark. It's just a product that has no name. It has no face. So if we can, I think a lot of us are committed to try to help out however we can. My question to you really is, we can compete fairly whenever there are fair rules. But I think that, is there a way for us to work together to make sure that the consumer really does know, to make sure that the manufacturer really does know where that steel was manufactured in the first place? Is there a model out there? Are there ideas that you have?
Scott.
Chairman Evankovich, those are great ideas, and some we've explored, some the legislature helped on. I know on the steel pipe monitoring program, we looked at that. Where's the origin of the steel coming in for natural gas drilling and distribution? I think your next panel might have some ideas for you on that, so maybe I'll defer our time to the next panel on the Buy American provisions. But Pennsylvania does have a strong Steel Procurement Act that's enforced aggressively by the Attorney General's office and overseen by DGS, so it's one of the best in the country. But your ideas are certainly worth exploring further.
Representative Bloom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You guys talked a lot about the negative externalities of production, the amount of environmental degradation from Chinese manufacturing where they don't have proper environmental safety regulations, the harm to the Chinese workers where they don't have workplace safety rules like we do. But kind of shifting gears a little bit, could you get into, I'm thinking about the negative externalities on the consumption side, and you mentioned a little bit about the quality. Are we facing a public safety issue? And we're using steel for vital installations, for high-pressure natural gas piping, for bridges, for structures. Is there a public safety issue that maybe is kind of getting lost in this whole discussion that would help us to turn the tide?
It's ironically, we kind of had that, Chris and I was talking about that this morning, about the infrastructure in Pennsylvania. I mean, obviously with all the bridges, we probably have more bridges in western PA than in most states. And obviously a lot are under repair. the quality of steel. I think what's happening with some companies in Pennsylvania, and I can relate more to Western PA because I live in the Pittsburgh area. So when we have the Greenfield Bridge and the Halton Bridge, a lot of those products, this steel is right here, which is fortunate. I visited Titusville Fab up in the Titusville area, and the rebar there, it went into the Greenfield Bridge, and that's because the owner of that company wanted to make sure that it was a plant originally over the south side of Pittsburgh, and now they're located up in Titusville, but the owner wanted to make sure that it was steel that was made right here, and I commend that owner for that. I think if we see more of that in manufacturers and businesses, I think that's something that can also help promote the steel. And I think, obviously, we need it because, look, with the Golden Gate Bridge, there was problems there, the bridge up in New York, but I think in Pennsylvania, at least in Western PA, and there's some smaller bridges. We had them down in Perryopolis where some small bridges was repaired, and that was done with steel from right here in made in USA.
Yeah, I agree with Bob, and I think you also just need to recognize it's certainly economic security, but it's also national security. I mean, if you don't have a domestic steel production base for your country, I mean, how are you going to develop infrastructure? How are you going to protect your country? You can't build a steel mill in 2 weeks. Our CEO, again, has been quoted several times in saying, in a time of crisis, you don't build a steel industry, you rely on your steel industry. We have a strong domestic steel industry right now. We need to make sure we have a strong domestic steel industry going forward. So I think your next panel, again, will have some interesting information on the economic security and the integrity.
Thank you, Chris. I apologize, Steve. I think we only have the room until 10:30. Representative Harhide had a very quick question to get to our second panel.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank both of you for testifying, and I think you do an excellent job of getting the education out on what we need as a public and as in the political arena. My thing is, we went after the dumping issue about 4 or 5 years ago pretty heavy. What was the result of that? Did we come ahead? I know that we, as you had mentioned, we have strong, in Pennsylvania, we have strong regs too.
Right.
Is that a result of that, or had that been in place prior to that?
Representative Harhide, good to see you. We could talk about that for the next 3 hours. The short version of an answer would be we have won most of our trade cases that we have filed. Unfortunately, when you win trade cases, you don't get the result that you should because there's a lot of global activity going on, and the steel continues to find its way into the U.S. market. That's why this Section 337 action we're filing, we feel, will address this problem once and for all in a very clear, transparent way that the public can see. So we've won trade cases. We've seen some reductions in imports, but they tend to go back up on the rise shortly thereafter.
I just want to offer that if we can help in any way, if you provide the information, if we all need to sign on to a letter to send to the federal government,
yes,
put it down in writing for us and let us all get together and throw our support behind that. We can ill afford to lose the jobs and the safety issues and everything that you've both mentioned, and we stand behind you 150%. So anything that we can do as a collaborative effort, we're definitely willing to do so. And again, thanks for taking the time this morning to come here.
Thank you, Representative Harhide. We need to move on to our next panel. I just want to recognize that we were joined by Representative Quigley and Representative Gobler. Chris, Bob, thank you so much for your time today and your explanations and your testimony. I'm sure that members may have follow-up questions. I know Representative Dush had a follow-up question or comment. Maybe we can wrap up after we wrap up here today.
Yep.
We can address that. But thank you so much. Moving on to the next panel, we have Scott Paul from the Alliance for American Manufacturing and David Taylor from the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Gentlemen, at your convenience when you're ready.
You go first. Representative Evankovich, thank you very much. I will actually completely disregard my written testimony and try to respond to, I think, some of the issues that have been raised here in the interest of time. First of all, to avoid the appearance of someone from Washington coming to tell you what to do, I wanted to give you my Pennsylvania bona fides. A graduate of Penn State, have deep roots in both Montgomery County and Somerset County. My mom was born in the tiny speck of Fort Hill, Pennsylvania. and so have deep regard for the state, and we have a strong presence in the state of Pennsylvania. In terms of some of the originations of the crisis that we're in right now, I think it's important to point out that this is not the product of market forces. It's not a case where U.S. producers are simply inefficient or unproductive. And in fact, the situation has been present, although the actors have changed over the years. Nearly every industrialized country in the world realizes that it's important to have self-sufficiency in critical manufacturing industries like the steel sector because of the economic and national security that it supplies to their own nation. What has accelerated this trend is the presence of China in the global marketplace. After China was admitted to the World Trade Organization in 2001, it unleashed a torrent of imports that have impacted not only the United States and Pennsylvania, but also even developing countries like Mexico, other Western democracies in Europe. The effects have been global, not a product of market forces. China has 5-year plans. 9 out of the 10 largest Chinese steel companies are owned all or in part by the Chinese government. China's economy, consumption-wise, has slowed over the last 3 years. China's production of steel has not slowed as much. And so anybody who understands basic economics knows that that means that there is an oversupply or overproduction of steel. The United States has incredibly low base tariffs on steel. In fact, in most cases, they're zero or near zero. We have perhaps the most open steel market of any country in the world that produces any sort of steel. And that has consequences. And the consequences have been a devastation in terms of the profits of the industry, 13,500 layoffs over the last few years. And then you've seen these waves of anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases. I remember when Representative Kortz was in the private sector talking about the impact of dumping about 10 years ago. And so it's like these dumping cases are like playing whack-a-mole. You can get at a particular line of industry, but China will find a way to refocus its production or to enter it into downstream products like appliances and get those into the United States. So we still feel the effects of it in our manufacturing sector. There are currently, I think, 4 anti-dumping and countervailing duty cases that are pending in cold-rolled, hot-rolled, plate, and corrosion-resistant, and they're currently working their way through the process. And a couple of years ago, I think a representative correctly pointed out that there was also a pipe and tube case that was decided by the Commerce Department as well that's had some impact on this. Now, why is this important to the overall economy of Pennsylvania, even if a small fraction of the populace works in the steel industry today? And that's simply because it does have the outside impact. Both Director McAuliffe and Mr. Massantonio mentioned the multiplier effect, where a steel job supports 6 or 7 other jobs in the community. Steel jobs also pay higher wages than almost any other type of employment, particularly for individuals who may work in steel mills who don't have a 4-year college degree. It's simply an irreplaceable job. And these workers are not overpaid. They are paid for the value that they're adding to a very sophisticated and high quality and essential product that's made for our utilization in many areas of society today, and in fact for our national security. The other reason that has caused this imbalance, and I think several representatives referenced this as well, is the externalities and the difference in environmental regulation. China, a ton of steel in China adds 3 to 4 times the amount of carbon to the atmosphere than a ton of steel produced in Pennsylvania. It adds about 18 to 20 times the amount of NOx and SOx emissions. China, its federal government has about as many environmental inspectors as the state of Pennsylvania for a steel industry that is exponentially larger in size. In fact, an AAM report that was done a few years ago went inside China, and some of the anecdotal evidence would make some of the folks involved in the steel industry was like, oh yeah, we have scrubbers, but we never turned them on because the inspectors never checked them. And they have tremendous electrical and energy subsidies that are available to the producers as well. China is responsible for about 435 million metric tons of overcapacity or oversupply in the global steel market. The United States makes about 100 million metric tons of steel every year. So you see, China's oversupply is 4 times as great as the annual production in the United States. China has continuously promised to end this oversupply, and it has failed to deliver on those problems. I'd be happy in Q&A to discuss some of the possible remedies that state legislatures could pursue beyond the resolution and procurement as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott, so much. David?
Well, you know, Scott is a hard act to follow. And I will also depart largely here from my written remarks. I want to thank all of you for being members of the Manufacturing Caucus. And as I always say on occasions like this, I want to live in a world where the hard-hat Democrats and the pro-business Republicans join together on a pro-production agenda for Pennsylvania, because that's how we prosper together. Certainly, all the things that have been said thus far by the USW, US Steel, and the Alliance for American Manufacturing are right on target. Let me try to respond to a couple of the questions that were already posed. Representative Reese, you were talking about, like, what is the nature of the subsidization? The foreign governments, because they recognize the value of these steelmaking jobs, and because steelmaking is foundational to any industrial economy, these foreign governments will subsidize their producers in country by, say, giving them free power or giving them bank loans that never need to be repaid. And so this is how these products can be made and then exported and then entered into our economy, not only at below market price, but oftentimes at below the price of raw materials for a U.S. competitor. So it's like this isn't mathematically possible unless somebody is cheating. So in this way, essentially, these foreign governments are waging economic warfare against us, and that they're trying to purchase out from under us our own domestic production. And I want to really emphasize strongly what Scott just said. You know, this is in no way an argument for domestic producers being out from under competitive pressure. You know, we know that to compete in a global marketplace, that we're going to continue to endure those pressures, that we've got to do it smarter, better, more cost effectively. But again, what is happening now is far outside the parameters of actual market competition. And just to put on the record, where I was going to close, that we need to move forward with the determination that was exemplified by President Reagan, who said, and I quote, "We will vigorously pursue our policy of promoting free and open markets in this country and around the world. We will insist that all nations face up to their responsibilities of preserving and enhancing free trade everywhere. But let no one mistake our resolve to oppose any and all unfair trading practices." That again, you know, for domestic manufacturers, we recognize that the U.S. only has 5% of the world's population, and therefore, 95% of our customers are around the world, and that we will continue to need to open open up, new markets to sell American goods. But what we absolutely cannot tolerate are these kinds of predatory practices by foreign governments to strip away our capacity, and that this is a very different thing from, okay, so Circuit City goes under, and 18 months later there's an H.H. Gregg. Or, Borders goes bankrupt and the Books A Million moves in. That kind of creative destruction, that happens all the time. That's to be expected. But when we're talking about heavy industry like steel production, you're talking about a capital investment that has been made over many decades, totaling an untold number of billions of dollars. And so, as was said, we're not going to be opening new steel mills, at least not at a great cost, which is why this sector is so foundational. It's so important. It adds so much value, and so many other things depend on the health and success of that sector. Including, as was mentioned, not just the employees, but also the prosperity of the communities where these facilities are located.
David, Scott, thank you for your testimony. We're going to move to questions here. We were also joined by Representative Topper. Before we move on to questions from the members present, Scott, I was really glad that you brought up kind of the environmental regulation aspect of things. Once upon a time, I used to be an accountant for a small steel company in Pennsylvania, and when I was at the Clairton Coke plant, I was responsible for accounting for particulate matter, all matter charged into the ovens and all matter pulled out of the ovens, down to dust particles weighed, okay? And gas extracted, as Chris mentioned, 180 million BTUs of gas on a daily basis. And we captured, as a company, at that plant, 99.96% of all materials charged we were able to weigh or measure otherwise on the way out. When we go to the store, oftentimes, we'll look for sales, buy one, get one, or buy two, get three free, whatever it is. The environmental movement in the United States has certainly created a heavy regulatory environment in our country. And some of that good, some of that thoughtful regulation, some of us hold the opinion that some of that regulation is too heavy-handed. The question I have is there a way to quantify what buy one, get one, so to speak, the environmental movement can get in focusing more on foreign steel production rather than domestic steel production? Is there a deal to be had?
I think that's a great question, and I think there is some movement by some folks in the environmental movement to look towards that as an element of sustainability, that localization, high quality, high standard production, rather than focus specifically on an industrial sector. Because even though NOx, SOx, that kind of emissions the impact is localized, particulate matter from China is having an impact on the west coast of the United States in terms of its air quality in a dramatic way. And the carbon emissions, regardless of what you think about the global warming debate, it's not a good thing to have one form of production that's putting 3 or 4 times more amount of carbon into the atmosphere than the type of production that we have in Pennsylvania. We actually were able, through this report, to quantify that kind of benefit that was garnered by Chinese producers from avoiding these types of regulations, and it was in the billions of dollars. It was a substantial amount. It was over $2 billion, and that was a conservative estimate. And if you've done a balance sheet for a company, you know how much of a difference that can make. But I do think that there's some recognition, both nationally and at the state level, that if you're trying to achieve sustainability, that having local high-quality production is one of the paths to get there.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. My memory serves me correctly. To pick up 0.03% of particulate matter emissions, U.S. Steel was slated to spend $1.2 billion to pick up 0.03%. And I just would imagine that capital investment will go a lot farther in another country. But first question goes to Representative Dush.
Thank you. Scott, you had said that this is not a product of market forces. And David, when you said the problem for us is foundational, that goes back to what China is doing with 90% of its production being done by the state government. It is a strategic attack on the United States and its ability to produce steel. Right now, every truck, tank, Humvee, M4, our howitzer ships, airframes, they rely on American-made steel, and yet we've had subcontractors buying Chinese-produced steel that have ended up causing structural problems in aircraft, that sort of thing. We have stuff rejected all the time coming in from subcontractors because of that kind of stuff. And China is, as you said, Scott, they have their 5-year plans, but they plan out 100 years in advance. They don't typically just look 5 years, but the 5-year plans, something holdover from Chairman Mao and before that Stalin, et cetera. But we have to wake up to the fact that this is something that is being done by a nation state that does not have America's best interest at heart. And they're using our environmentalists, they're using others, as Khrushchev used to call the useful idiots, is what he used to call the people he was using in the United States to try and sell his agenda. And now that the fall of the Soviet Union, we've got evidence of those people that were being used, and they were dupes. And unfortunately, I have a feeling too late, some people are going to end up waking up to what is actually going on and realize that this is a coordinated effort.
Well, Representative Dush, I couldn't possibly agree more. And, you know, when you look at the trade relationship with the People's Republic of China, the dictatorship in Beijing, that we have allowed them to run trade surpluses with the U.S. of hundreds of billions of dollars year over year for 15 years, and that now the annual trade deficit with China is $1/3 of $1 trillion. It's the largest transfer of wealth from one country to another in the history of the world. And this is something that our leaders in Washington of both parties just don't want to focus on, that everybody is in their own silo looking at these separate things, when in fact, as you correctly note, that the dictatorship in Beijing has a multi-pronged attack on the United States and on becoming not only a hegemonic power in the Pacific, but being a global superpower, which they intend one day to supplant us. And so at the same time that the Chinese are engaging in cyber attacks, industrial espionage, anti-satellite warfare activity, that they're floating a blue water navy, projecting force out into the Pacific, building military installations, that our trade relationship with China must be viewed in that context. And I was pleased to see the U.S. Department of Defense finally, after many years of denial, recognizing the larger geostrategic threat from the PRC.
Well, and just to touch how they're being used, the people that are against our steel industry are being used here. I can stand outside a Steelton Works and not smell the coal smoke. I was in Korea, South Korea, a couple years ago, and people are wearing dust masks, and that stuff is coming the whole way across North Korea down into the southern part of the South Korean peninsula, and people are having a hard time dealing with the particulate matter that's coming out of China. So thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Dush. Representative Quartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. You use the terms economic warfare, predatory practices, and to follow up on Representative Dush's, if I may, we need steel to build aircraft carriers, battleships, Abrams tanks, submarines, right? We need that to have a strong national defense, and you talked about that, Scott, in your testimony here. You brought up Brigadier General John Adams talking about national defense and the need for steel. Along that vein, where do you see the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Do you view this as another attack, just another way to get in and take away our steel industry? Do you view it in that light?
Yeah, Representative Quartz, thank you for the question. I think that if you look at a even dispassionate economic analysis of the potential impacts of the TPP, you'd have to say that for the steel industry in particular, the benefits would not be great. In fact, there's a potential for harm. Currency manipulation, which is a problem that faces not only the steel industry but other industries, is not addressed in the core of the agreement. And there's no remedies available for companies who want to seek redress for the impact of currency manipulation. The rules of origin, that means what is treated as a duty-free good, are diminished from NAFTA, where the threshold was 60%, that's dropped to 35%, so you could have a good that is essentially 65% Chinese steel transshipped through another country and get duty-free treatment into the United States under the TPP. And even the proponents' analysis of the TPP predicts that it would grow our trade deficit by about $50 billion and also cause anywhere from 120 to 300,000 additional manufacturing job losses. So you might, I mean, the president argues that there's some national security benefit to doing it. I don't think that weakening our manufacturing base, particularly in industries like steel, accomplishes that objective.
But he likes to ride around in a bulletproof Cadillac, so, and that's made out of steel, right? Okay, I'm sorry.
Maybe even titanium. I'm not so sure, but a very strong alloy. Yeah.
Well, we make it at ATI.
That's right.
Thank you, Representative Quartz. You know, it's funny. I've talked to a lot of different businesses across the state, a lot of different manufacturers, and there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here in the United States and in Pennsylvania, and it seems at times that we are on a perpetual race to the bottom with some of this economic growth. And I think that I truly believe that a large part of it is due to these foundation industries like steel. Scott, you seem like a much smarter man than I am, and just understanding of the detail in a way that I probably never could. But for a simple farmhand from Westmoreland County, can you explain to me when you lose ownership, American ownership of not only the manufacturing of steel, the processing of steel, really any business, the service centers, the manufacturing of the final product, as you lose that here and that we become a country that imports those things, the wealth that is generated from the ownership, from it being here, and how that wealth, how that money transfers from American bank to American bank, from American pocket to American pocket, versus if you're buying it from overseas, from an American bank to a Chinese bank. I think a lot of people are okay buying a Chrysler knowing that it's going to go to a company perhaps that, you know, it's a bank located in Italy. But if you're buying a product that the final dollar is winding up by a bank owned by a country, it's a little bit different. And there are a couple different things that I laid on the table there, but my question for you is, can you help us understand in the simplest terms as possible, especially for me, what the ultimate effect is of us continuing to lose the ownership here, of us continuing to lose the benefits of those small and large businesses that support steel and other manufacturers here in the United States, and how perhaps does that make us slaves of our own labor at some point versus leaders of creation?
Sure. First, I would kindly disagree and respectfully disagree with your premise that you lack an understanding of this. I think you have a deep understanding. Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked the question. But I will nevertheless proceed. The effects are profound. They're profound in economic terms. First, let's talk about for the workers. And this is not speculation. This is actually solid research out of MIT. The China shock, which is the surge of Chinese imports coming in, economic theory had been, okay, we're going to lose some jobs, but prices are going to be lower and our economy will be better off. That's kind of the theory. Well, this MIT study showed that the impact of the displacement from the China shock shock is much more profound than any mainstream economist ever thought. And so those jobs that were lost had a permanent impact on the community, on the wage levels of not only the factory workers, but of every person in that community. They experienced about an $1,800 on average loss in wages per year. And you think about that, across the United States, and it's profound. In terms of ownership, the impact, where production goes, research and development usually follows. It is impossible, except for in the case of Apple, which is able to throw a lot of money at things right now because of its shareholder value. Eventually, where you are producing is where your R&D ends up. And that has an additional impact on our economy. Right now, manufacturing is responsible for 90% of the patents that are filed in the United States, 2/3 of the private sector research and development. But as we've seen in other industries, like in high storage battery or other sorts of industries, when the production tends to get offshore, the R&D tends to get offshored as well, and that has a measurable impact. And you look at the pattern of growth in this country, and we've been largely a consumption-based economy, and we've transitioned to that, and there's some positive aspects to that. It means we have disposable income, but the challenge is also, you're familiar with capital investments, obviously, in steel mills. Those are irreplaceable. Those fixed assets are critically important to a whole range of industries in the United States, and it is simply irreplaceable, which is why any mayor would rather have a factory that employs 1,000 people than a hospital or a Walmart or anything like that, because the impact of that, as long as you can keep those jobs there, is going to be much more profound on your community. I hope that's an adequate response to your question.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. And David, I'll give you a chance to follow up on that as well. But just in addition, intimately familiar with Pennsylvania, what are the number one and number two things that we can do here to encourage that capital investment to be here and to take the handcuffs off of people who want to manufacture in Pennsylvania, particular steel? Number one and number two things.
Right. Well, competitiveness is a moving target, and so we need government to move at the speed of business. Number one would be do not allow state government to grow faster than the private economy. And number two, that we need to adopt a pro-growth tax changes like the net operating loss carry forward. And that's especially important for our legacy industries, for our long-standing industrial corporate citizens like our steelmakers.
David, I appreciate it. Just for a disclaimer, in a joking fashion, of course, the House Manufacturing Caucus trademarked that statement, government moving at the speed of business. That is a Pennsylvania House Manufacturing Caucus term that we've been using, and I'm glad that David picked it up. Thank you.
But I do want to respond to the question in that there are things that our federal government does that put us behind. There's stupidity that we inflict on ourselves that we can change, and that when it comes to global competition, that the U.S. has a system of global taxation, whereas every other advanced country on earth has a territorial system of taxation, and here's what that means. If, say, a German company, let's say BMW, earns profits in another country, pays the taxes to that country where the product is sold, that those profits, they want to take them back to Germany. The German government says, hey, you've paid taxes on that, you bring that money in. The U.S. says that if an American company earns dollars overseas, pays all the taxes to that country where the work was done, then tries to bring those dollars back to the U.S., the IRS treats those dollars that makes them pay the U.S. rate. And so right now there's about $2 trillion of U.S. earnings, corporate earnings overseas that could be reinvested in the U.S. for production and hiring that U.S. companies can't bring home because of that extra tax bite. In addition, the U.S. at about 35% has the highest corporate rate in the world. And of course, at 9.99, Pennsylvania has the highest flat rate in America. Guess where that leaves us? So this is why you see these sorts of inversions, that Burger King would buy Tim Hortons to become a Canadian company so that Burger King's profits from around the world don't get taxed at the U.S. rate. And so what it does, number one, it undermines U.S. global corporate leadership, and it puts us in a position where U.S. companies are going to be purchased by foreign companies to be subsidiaries of those foreign companies here in the U.S. It's a terrible tax policy, and it needs to be reversed.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. We had a late addition to the batting order here. Representative Topper would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for coming in late through the testimony, but thank you for the opportunity, because you mentioned one thing about the R&D money. I noticed, as in my short term here in the legislature, that we send money to higher education institutions. We send money sometimes directly to like maybe economic development with biotech companies that are specifically for R&D. You guys aren't seeing, or are you, state money or federal money for research and development in your industry?
In the steel industry, there is a limited amount through what's called the National Network of Manufacturing Institutes for advanced lightweight metals that includes steel and aluminum. But most of the resources are brought to bear by the companies themselves. Like U.S. Steel invested, in fact, has a research center in Michigan that does a lot of work for new types of steel materials for the automobile industry. I think one of the challenges that you see is that's almost entirely state-sponsored in China or even in many of the countries in Western Europe, and so it's another dimension of the challenge that we face. But one thing, and I would be remiss to not answer this question before I know our time expires here, but some specific actions that state lawmakers could consider to strengthen the competitiveness of the steel industry, in addition to the resolution that was passed, maintaining the procurement laws and avoiding weakening them, I think, is critically important role of government. And Pennsylvania is fortunate to have a strong steel procurement law that should not be weakened at all. In addition, the state from time to time is asked to sign on to government procurement agreements as part of trade agreements, and it should avoid doing so unless there is some guarantee for reciprocity. Oftentimes there is not. But states are pressured into do that. The Attorney General could certainly look at excluding certain types of products that may be in the state as a result of copyright infringement or intellectual property violations. That's something some other state attorneys general have pursued, and that may be worth looking at. And again, the going back to infrastructure, which I think is very important, not making the mistake that the state of California did with its Bay Bridge, which is completely offshoring that to a state-owned enterprise in China that promised an impossible price and impossible time delivery for the San Francisco Bay Bridge, and failed to deliver on either, and it ended up costing the taxpayers more, and ended up creating about 3,500 steel jobs in China instead of somewhere on the west coast of the United States. I think it's critically important to make sure that the major infrastructure projects in the state, even those that are perhaps permitted by the state but operated by private entities, to assert appropriate regulatory oversight to make sure that that's using Pennsylvania steel if possible, and American steel essentially. Those are a couple of the things that could be done.
Yeah, Scott's absolutely right about that, and I want to go back to a point that Representative Bloom raised about the question of whether there's a public safety concern. And the answer is yes, there is, because the mislabeling, the deliberate mislabeling of Chinese goods that we have seen is systematic, and therefore you can have things exported to the U.S. guaranteed by the Chinese producer to be of a certain quality when in fact they are not. And as was mentioned about the plant in McKeesport making tubular steel, in Pennsylvania, we have a tremendous opportunity with the natural gas revolution to take Pennsylvania-produced energy, to have Pennsylvania steel mill jobs making the pipe to connect that Pennsylvania production with the industrial and commercial and residential consumers who can make use of it. And so, again, when we talk about what can we do here in Pennsylvania to help our domestic steel producers, optimizing conditions for growth with the development of our natural gas industry is one way of doing that.
Thank you, David. We were joined by Representative Cohen from Philadelphia, and we're going to close questions with Representative Bloom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dave, that was a good segue into my question. I started out my morning, I'm a member of the Legislative Gas and Oil Caucus, a similar bipartisan to this bipartisan caucus like this manufacturing caucus. And we had a meeting at which we heard from a number of folks about the vital need for natural gas infrastructure, pipeline in particular, to get that product to market. And I kind of wanted to wrap all that up into this, given all that we've heard this morning about the challenges, really the stacked deck, the tilted field against Pennsylvania steel manufacturers, especially given China's conduct, their unfair, illegal conduct. How essential is it to your manufacturing, to your ability to keep making steel in Pennsylvania, that we have inexpensive, abundant, accessible energy in Pennsylvania? Natural gas, coal, the electric grid. How important is that energy infrastructure to those Pennsylvania jobs that depend on steel?
It's supremely important. It's indispensably important, and it has the potential to be a major competitive advantage for Pennsylvania if, again, our lawmakers optimize conditions for growth so that we can deploy this to benefit our industrial consumers.
Any last questions, comments? Okay, gentlemen, appreciate your testimony. Just in closing, Chris, Bob, Scott, Dave, I appreciate your candor and your ability to answer our questions. I think it's been made clear, at least to me, that there's a difference between free trade and fair trade, and that when American companies are given the opportunity to compete on a level playing field, they can do so extremely well. And to hear things like from David about how companies are able to sell their products below raw material cost, and that when trade cases are fought at the federal level, yeah, there might be an award or a settlement at the end of the day, but that also might have meant that steel workers lost their jobs and steel plants have closed down. As somebody who's personally seen steel mills around me disassembled and put in shipping containers, I think all of us here in Pennsylvania are sensitive to the fact that something has to change, or the road we're on will continue to lead us to the same point. I really would like to see some type of movement in our state with some policies, bipartisan policies, that ensure that we're not on a race to the bottom, that we take advantage of the things like Representative Bloom said, that we have unlimited energy and water resources. We're in a great proximity to population centers. We have a great work ethic. We have great hardworking people. We have great infrastructure. And with your help, your advice, your policy minds, hopefully we can enact some of the changes into law to make sure that we're on a race to the top. So, and I want to thank all the members for their attendance today and their questions. Thank you.
Thank you.